Hello, welcome back to my channel where we're talking about data. Primarily, we've been looking recently at how to design your data store, whether you're doing reporting through a sophisticated tool or building databases to provide for reporting. We've covered a number of different topics, and today we're going to talk about one that I always find difficult to have the discussion about because usually the solution is not easy. It also makes your reporting a little difficult. So the topic is managing your historical or changing data so that you can report not only the as is, but the as was. And in many cases, this is critically important in your reporting process. And in other cases, it's just a nice to have. But either way, you need to think about how you want to create the data, store the data, and then report out the data. So I want to show you a number of different ways that you can design a solution that meets your needs and talk about the official history types as the data modeling world likes to name them, acronymize them, or give them a cutesy little code, but we'll talk about those as well. So here's the problem statement, and that is we're going to look at another system of Daisy Hill that we won't talk about how it integrates to the rest of the reporting because one of the topics to talk about the rescue puppies application is how to get the puppy information into the master data of puppy, and then that also then brings up the issue of monitoring or tracking changes to that master data, which is a whole nother extension of this topic. But let's just talk today about the isolated case of the rescue puppies application. It is known that typically we bring in a puppy and we get them from a rescue. We get a number of puppies, we bring them in, we board them, we get them healthy, and then we find adoptive parents for these puppies. And a lot of times that's the only step that the puppy has to take. We find a nice parent, they keep the puppy, and everybody has a very happy, cuddly future. But there are occasions where the adoptive caretaker is only there to help acclimate the puppy into an environment and then move them on to a less skilled owner that would then continue to raise the puppy as their own. Sometimes the puppy just doesn't work out and there's an unhappy match, so we bring the puppy back into the kennel so we can find another adoptee and potential owner. The application that we have typically just tracks the current status and the current location of the puppy, but we've been asked to, from a reporting standpoint, be able to report where the puppies have been before they got to where they are now and understanding how that works. So let's talk about a number of different design methodologies that will support capturing of data because in this case, after having discussion, we did indeed determine that history is an important piece of this. So first, let's go ahead and bring up our puppy rescue table itself. Here we have the rescue puppy. Where'd rescue puppy? There's rescue puppy. So we'll just bring it out and make it a little bit larger so we all can see it fairly easily. And it's a very simple little table. We've kept this as straightforward as possible to have this discussion with. We have a puppy ID that's assigned by the rescue system, and puppy has a name, the date it's been rescued, and the estimated age. We take a guess as to what its breed is, and then once it's adopted, we update the adoption date and the adoption owner. All this is very nice and simple, but we want to begin to capture history. So what do we talk about from a history standpoint? Well, now we're going to begin to drop this into the different nomenclatures that are used by data architects and data modelers, and we'll talk about the different history types. History type number 0, which is simply to ignore changes. In history type number 0, and we'll bring these two puppies in here, and because the data does not change, and it's very possible to go ahead and model your data as such, what we have in this case, we look at the model, we have a puppy table that has just the standard information associated with puppy ID, puppy name, rescue date, etc. This information does not change. However, the puppy can be adopted, so then we create a record for the adoption because it will not change either. And you've noticed that the nomenclature here of the relationship is that for a rescue puppy, there is only one adoption. And so therefore we can deal with data that is not changing. Not very real world like, but there are cases where this fits, and it's nice to know that there's a nomenclature for it. History type number 1, and this happens to be with overwrite the old data with new. And this is pretty much what it is that you will do on a regular basis, especially from the application level, but it's really nice. And one of the things I changed between the Rescue Puppy and the Rescue Puppy 1, which is the overrate old with new history, and that is I've added in the last update timestamp so that we actually know when that data has changed. And if they haven't added this into your database, it's one of those standard columns I add to every table that I've ever created for an application because it's really good to know when it was updated. So we allow data to change. We just simply keep a date and time and update the data as it needs to occur. That's typically what you would do history type 1. Then we look at history type 2, which is the old data and the new data in the same table. This is where it begins to become a bit more complicated, but people fall into history type 2 quite regularly because it's basically just create a new record. And in that case, what we have to do is change the primary key so that we have just not only the puppy ID, but the effective date. So we know when that record was effective for that puppy. We also need the expiration date so that we know when that record is no longer accurate. And it's always a very nice convenience to have an active flag so you can always find the current record. This is a simple way for applications to implement this, but you have to be careful when you query the data to know that for any puppy, there are multiple records in here and they change over time. You can find the current one or any one that is active as a certain point in time. Typically, again, if you're tracking history, this is the one that most people tend to fall into or to choose to do. That's type number 2. History type 3 is the previous values in separate columns. You may be snickering out there saying, well, why would you ever do that? That's just really strange. Well, I have news for you. I've seen this done in many different cases. It's another because all the data doesn't change, only some of the data change. So the answer becomes, why not go ahead and just capture the data that changes? In this case, if you look at our puppy table, the name, the rescue date, and the estimated age, as well as a breed name and adoption. Breed name is not going to change. The adoption date and the owner name will, and we don't really care about all of them. We just like to know what the previous one was. So this way we can just simply track what is the data now, and then what was the data before that by having the previous puppy name, the previous adoption date, and the previous owner name. So we can track any changes that occur there and reference them back just slightly in time, because basically we're saying that the data doesn't change that often, so just having 2 copies of it is okay. It's a little bit tough to maintain this, but again, it gives you to a degree that information that you're looking for. That is history type number 3. History type 4 is where you have a puppy history table. You actually create a history table. I tend to like to have a separate history table, and I write every piece of data that is changed into that history table, including the current record. Some people that do this, there was puppy rescue history. Let's bring it out here, and we're going to drop it right below the a little bit of puppy history. There's puppy history. Add it to the diagram. There it is. Puppy history. And just to show you the slight difference between these two is that the history table will have in it the last update timestamp. It's part of the primary key, just like the puppy rescue 2. Here we do not have a active flag because the puppy rescue data will be the most current the puppy rescue table will be the most current, and then just simply every record that is written out will be written out into here along with its history. So then I can create any kind of previous information that I need. And again, you can always change the way you do this, but the process is that whenever this puppy data changes, we write the new record into the puppy history, so we're always having a copy of it. Corollarily, or as an aside, some people don't like to write the current record into the history, so whenever the puppy table actually would rescue puppy table would change, they would then write the old record out and keep the new record here. I myself don't like that because it comes a bit tough because you have to union these two tables together to get the accurate picture, and unions are not that efficient within the database world if you have lots of data. And that is history type number 4. And it's up to you to go ahead and build each one of those. Now, you might be saying that the application people don't like to change their data. They don't want to go ahead and keep history there. It's strictly something that's necessary for reporting, so they don't want to be bothered with it. Well, they always can look at two things. One is simply to always request that they go ahead and put a timestamp into the table, even if they don't want it to be there. And then also be even better if they create a change log table that will write anytime a record changes, it writes that change into the log table. So now you can query this log table to build the history the way that you want to report it and to maintain it yourself. What is in the log table then is that for the puppy ID, there is a change code, either an insert, update, or a delete, and a record timestamp as to when that occurred. That is how you can begin to track the data and process only current data. The nicest thing about a database change log table is that it can be done at the database level in pretty much all of the major RDBMSs that you would be using through the implementation or creation of triggers, so the application doesn't have to change. So whenever a record changes, the database itself will write the record into the change log, and then you can pull the change log records out there. It's a very easy to implement. I've done it a number of times. So when the data warehouse had that requirement for history, application people balked at doing any extra work. We simply put a change log out there and use database triggers to build them, and then every day we would pull the changes and maintain and build our history the way it needed to be changed depending upon the subject matter. Speaking of which, what we looked at up to now happens to be the relational aspect of doing the history, and the question becomes, well, we have a dimensional data mart. How do we deal with history inside of our dimensional data mart? And to do that, we're first going to look at how we would build the rescue puppy reporting data mart should we need to do so as the requirement for maintaining it in our data warehouse. And so just looking at the data, where the data simply the most current information is always kept in the data warehouse, we have gone ahead and made sure there was a record update date in that data as well, just so we can process it. But this is the way that we would build out the dimensions and facts associated with the rescue puppy, so that we simply would have a puppy dimension with a puppy fact. Notice that there is a one-to-one relationship between the puppy dimension and the puppy fact. We're only going to keep one copy of it because we're not maintaining history. We have a breed dimension and the date dimension so that we know the adoption date that is in the puppy fact table. Oh, quick little change there. That is not adoption date. Let's change things on the fly. Show you how easy this is to do. That is not the adoption date. That is the rescue date. Over here, we'll change it to rescue date. There we go. So the puppy fact table has the rescue date, the breed, the estimated age, and the date that that record was actually created. We also, when a puppy is adopted, we'll go ahead and create the adoption fact, which will be, again, we're not maintaining data, so we have the rescue puppy, and we're only going to keep one record, no data being maintained as a history, and it has the adoption date, and we want the breed here for reporting, as well as the owner name. So without maintaining data, this is how we would build it with the current data looking out there so that we can see the rescue puppies and report off of them. So when we're looking at data warehousing, we're just going to look at a couple of history types. So history type, we're going to look at both how to do this in a dimension and how to do this in a fact table. It is slightly different, but not a major difference. History type 2, that is the old and new data in the same table. Now there's a little bit of argument or discussion between data modelers, and that is what do we do within that dimension table as far as the dimension IDs. So from the most clean standpoint, let's bring our puppy rescue dimension 2 into there. Make it all a little bit bigger. So in the pure maintenance of this, what we have is each individual record for the puppy is created with its own ID. We need to maintain the puppy ID so that if we have more than one record for that puppy, we know it's in here so that we can track history of an individual puppy. But in general, what we've done is we've gone ahead and created a unique ID for the dimension, and then we go ahead and add the effective and expiration dates into it as well as the current flag. Now what this means from the current flag is a little bit tougher to understand, and that's one reason why I don't like doing it this way. So this current means is the most current record for this puppy ID is this warehouse ID, and you'll need to make sure that when you do this, you will only look at the fact table associated with the puppy at that time. So the way that you would do this is that you would have your puppy fact table. And it would be related to this table here as its primary key. So that essentially then whenever we have created a new puppy update record, we create a fact to go along with it that shows the current facts for that record that's going in there. This gives you duplication of data. It certainly does. Makes sure you have to be careful how you count through that data, because if you're counting the number of puppies that you have, you got to make sure you only count the current ones, not count all of them, and you look at the facts just for the current one. If you want to see history, you look back in history. So this is typically the way you would build your data warehouse for the records being in the same table. Move that back out. History type 2 fact, where we have old and new data in the same table. This is a little bit simpler way as to dealing with the fact table. If you don't need to be capturing the changing of the dimension, but rather counting the fact table, then all that you would have is you would keep your same rescue puppy dimension. And when you create your rescue puppy fact, you would simply have the effective date and the rescue puppy's warehouse ID as the primary key, and then as this record changed, you would add additional records or changes into these records to modify, to capture the change of the adoption date and the name of the adoptive party if you wish to include that in here as well. So this is how you would go ahead and create your standard dimension, which does not have history, and a fact dimension, fact table that does have history. It would then track all the changes to your puppy fact table, and knowing that you have just the most current one. So this is just with the puppy fact being historical. Coming off of that, Let's look at history type 4, and that is where you would have the puppy dimension and a puppy history. And so what you have is you take your standard rescue puppy dimension, and you would simply then, this would be your current data. You don't need the current flag because it is the current data, always will be the current data. And then what you add is a rescue puppy history dimension. It has no direct relationship to this one. And you basically then would have your warehouse ID for the puppy, your effective date, expiration date, and the current flag. So this way you can see the changes of this dimension. And then you can use this warehouse ID to go into any of the facts so that you can then pull a fact table along with the details of the history or the as is version of that rescue puppy. So you can use them interchangeably within your reporting. So you can look at historical data or the current data, but knowing that the rescue puppy dimension itself is always the most current data. For dimensions, this is what I typically go ahead and pull in here, because keep in mind, 80% of your reporting is not going to be historical in nature. It's going to be current. So this makes it easy to do your current reporting, and then your as was reporting. You can go ahead and use the history dimension as a replacement for the actual non-historical or current dimension. Makes it the easiest way to deal with querying in my experience. And then finally, let's take a look at the history type 4 of a fact, because we do essentially the same thing. We just create a copy of the fact table and we put all of the records in there so that anytime you want to do the reporting of the fact as was, you can do that. Otherwise, you do the reporting strictly out of the rescue puppy fact table itself. Best if I could actually do alphabet in here. And so all the same relationships that you would have associated with the fact table are also related to the history fact table. If you're reporting current, you simply query against the puppy fact table with the dimensions within your dimensional query. If you want to look at it as was, then you can query using the same dimensions into the history fact table with the exact same query, just looking at a date range, effective date, and expiration date for your query. Again, that's typically what I like to do. It's the one that's easiest to understand from querying standpoints and reporting. I want to talk about one last thing, and we'll just leave that here for this picture, and that has to do with what I call the temporal fact table. Occasionally, what you're looking at is not all of your records being tracked from a history standpoint. Sometimes there's only one element that is important within your history. All the other elements, you only want them as current. You do not really need to be tracking them history. So you ask the question from a data warehousing standpoint, why do I want to carry all these big records around when I'm really just looking at a specific piece of information? And that is something I started building many years ago with a very dynamic environment where I worked and for reporting purposes, and it is a temporal fact table. And what you do here, you simply track that one attribute that's changes. In this case, we've added a new attribute, which is called the rescue status. So we know what the status of that puppy is at any point in time. We don't care about tracking the history of all the rest of the data. We just want to know at any point in time what was the status of that puppy. And so we have the puppy dimension, we have the status dimension, and then we simply have the current flag and an effective date and expiration date for when the rescue puppy had that status. And that's a great way of tracking changes in any kind of very dynamic database or environment without having to keep a lot of copies of data. And if you just simply want to see the changes in status or the current status, you come into that single fact table. I myself like these because typically when you talk to your business, they say, oh yeah, I need history, but they really might only need one piece of history. And then there's no reason not to create a fact table. In that case, in this case, a temporal fact table just to track that one piece of data changing. In quick summary, one thing I always say to everybody, especially some of the junior data architects, data modelers, and people that are generating reports for the first time, is don't ask if reporting requires history, because if you ask if they need history, they're going to say yes without even thinking about what that means. Listen to what they have to say so that you can determine if history is a requirement for within the reporting, and then you follow it up with a pointed question about exactly how they'd be using a specific piece of data. Application developers really do not like doing history. They ignore history. Your applications are about the here and now. And so you need to work with the application people to get the data that you need for reporting. But odds are they're not going to be changing their data store a whole lot to facilitate your reporting. As always, there are no right or wrong data structures. Use the data structure that matches your needs. Choose one that provides the most flexibility. And as always, document your data with models and metadata so everybody knows what's there. When you begin to deal with historical data, it's also nice to go ahead and create, as part of the metadata, sample queries so people understand how they access historical data, because it's a bit different within the query than you would be doing with regular data, because you have the range joined between two data sets potentially. As a side note for Alteryx, check out my Alteryx video where I talk about range or non-equijoins, because if you're doing historical data and managing the reporting requirements of historical data that's already been created, you will need to do a little bit of extra work to get the as was information out of your Alteryx data flow. Hope this helps. Try to give you some best information for that so that you can deal with history when it's being asked of you. Have any questions? Drop me a comment. Have anything else you would like to see me do? Go ahead and send me an email. Drop me a comment there as well. And as always, subscribe so you can see additional videos as they are created. Y'all have a great day.